It's a completely normal everyday situation. You board a train to the nearest big city in the early afternoon. You have a job interview there. Maybe you're nervous, going over the questions your potential employer might ask, or thinking again about whether you've memorized the route correctly. It's everyday situations like these, when you sit lost in thought on the train and look out the window. The journey passes by, the landscape looks increasingly urban, and the train is about to reach its final destination. You gather your belongings and prepare to get up and leave the train at the next station. Then you hear screams so loud that your blood runs cold. They come from the neighboring car. You are so frightened that you sit there in shock. And just as suddenly as the screams began, they stop again. What do you do when a normal train ride in broad daylight turns into a nightmare? Deborah Lindsley was born in Kent, England in 1962. The county is not too far from the capital, London. Deborah is affectionately called Debbie by her parents and friends. She grows up in a very sheltered environment and has an older brother named Gordon. The siblings have a very close relationship. Debbie also has a good relationship with her parents. Her father, Arthur, is an insurance broker. Her mother, Margaret, works at the Department of Social Security. As an adult, Debbie moves to Edinburgh, Scotland. There she works as a hotel manager. Not only did she find a great job in the picturesque city, she also found the love of her life. She's very happy with her boyfriend. She enjoys living in Edinburgh. Nevertheless, in March 1988, she is drawn back to her old home. Debbie Lindsley is now 26 years old and is attending a hotel management course in London that lasts several days. During this time, she's staying with her parents. She can commute to London very easily from the county of Kent. The train journey takes just under half an hour. What's more, in 2 weeks' time, there will be every reason to celebrate. Her brother Gordon is getting married to his fiancée. Debbie is set to be a bridesmaid and is looking forward to being there on her brother's big day.
Debbie was looking very much forward to her brother's wedding. She was very excited about it. She was looking forward to being a bridesmaid. When she went for a fitting at the beginning of March with the other two bridesmaids, she looked lovely in it.
Unfortunately, the 26-year-old will not live to see her brother's wedding. Debbie Lindsley will die before the wedding date. On the afternoon of March 23, 1988, Debbie wants to go to London. It is a Wednesday. Debbie has unexpectedly received a job offer during her hotel management course. She could start at the Sherlock Holmes Hotel in London. Although Debbie feels at home in her new hometown of Edinburgh, the prospect of being closer to her family appeals to the young woman, as does the idea of working in a prestigious hotel in the British capital. But first, Debbie wants to get an idea of her potential new workplace for herself. She makes an appointment with the hotel manager for that Wednesday afternoon. She dresses up especially for the interview. She wears a blue sweater and matching blue skirt, as well as a black leather jacket. Her brother Gordon is also visiting their parents at the moment. After lunch, the two watch TV together for a while before it's time for Debbie to leave for the train station. She wants to take the train to London, as she has done dozens, if not hundreds, of times during her childhood and youth. Gordon offers to drive her to the station by car. This way, Debbie doesn't have to walk there and saves a little time. Debbie gratefully accepts the offer. At around 2 p.m., Gordon drops his sister off at Patswood Station. The two wave goodbye to each other. Debbie Lindsley goes to the ticket office. At 2:04 p.m., on March 23, 1988, she buys her ticket to London, unaware that it is her ticket to death. The train is scheduled to depart from Patswood to London Victoria at 2:16 p.m. The train stops at 10 stations before arriving at its final destination at 2:50 p.m. as scheduled. The train consists of different cars. Not all of them are the same. There are different types of cars. Some have a center aisle through which passengers can move to another compartment. In a few other cars, this is not possible. They are not connected to the other cars and are self-contained compartments. The only way to leave these compartments is through the train doors, which only open at stops. Debbie also sits in a car of the latter type. Debbie always makes sure to sit in an open compartment with a central aisle when traveling by train. The 26-year-old is very concerned about her safety. She even carries a whistle on her keychain, which she can use to attract attention in an emergency. But on this Wednesday afternoon, Debbie is acting contrary to her usual habit. The young woman sits down in a closed compartment. These closed carriages are also smoking carriages. Since Debbie is a smoker, she probably chose the closed carriage that day. And when she boards at Patswood, there may be other people sitting in the middle of the carriage, making Debbie feel safe. However, as the route to London Victoria is a classic commuter route, passengers are constantly getting on and off. It is now believed that Debbie was sitting alone in the carriage at some unspecified point in time. She smokes a cigarette and starts to eat something. She packed sandwiches at home to take with her. Debbie Lindsley must have had a completely normal, relaxed train journey at first. But when the train arrives at Platform 2 at London Victoria at 2:50 p.m. as scheduled, Debbie does not get off. Train attendant Ron Lacey routinely walks through all the compartments. He checks to see if all passengers have disembarked at the final stop. But in the second car, he is shocked. There's a large pool of blood on the floor. The seat cushions are also stained red. Lying in front of him is the body of Debbie Lindsley. Someone must have murdered the young woman who was on her way to a job interview. During her train journey, which lasted just under 35 minutes, in the middle of the day, in the middle of London. When emergency services arrive at London Victoria Station, there is nothing they can do for Debbie. The 26-year-old has already died from her injuries. Her body has a total of 11 stab wounds. At least 5 of these stab wounds are located in the immediate vicinity of her heart. Just one would have been enough to kill her. The remaining wounds are on her neck and face. Debbie's hands show defensive wounds. She must have fought her killer while the train was still moving. Unfortunately, without success. A Scotland Yard spokesperson later said that Debbie may have been attacked for sexual reasons and had defended herself. However, there were no signs of a completed sexual assault on Debbie's body. Robbery and murder can also be ruled out. Her handbag is lying next to Debbie's body. Her jewelry and 5 pounds in cash, which her brother Gordon had lent her, are still there. The numerous bloodstains in the carriage do not all belong to Debbie. Some of the blood also belongs to an unknown person, to Debbie's presumed murderer, who must have injured himself during the crime. This also fits with Debbie's defensive wounds. Because the carriage was not connected to the other tracks, the young woman had no chance of escaping her attacker. If she had had any chance at all of breaking free from the murderer, her only way out would have been to jump onto the tracks at full speed. The weapon used to stab Debbie was never found. However, investigators suspect that it was a kitchen knife with a 12 to 19 centimeter blade. This would indicate that the perpetrator brought this weapon with him from home, and that he was on his way with the intention of committing murder or seriously injuring someone. The shock of Debbie Lindsley's brutal murder runs deep, not only in British society, but of course especially in the family of the murdered woman. The 26-year-old was simply torn from life on a normal day. When Debbie is buried in April, she will be buried in the sky blue dress she would have worn as a bridesmaid at her brother Gordon's wedding. Just a few weeks before her death, She had attended the fitting appointment with the other bridesmaids. While Debbie is buried in the dress that was supposed to be worn on one of the family's happiest days, the police are hunting for her killer. But initially without success. The population is very unsettled. The British Rail Company also responds to this. Shortly after Debbie's murder, the company announced that it would phase out the type of carriage that was not connected to the other compartments. This was intended to increase passenger safety. However, this measure did not solve the core problem. Debbie Lindsley's murderer is still at large. In connection with the murder on the train, the police take more than 1,200 witness statements. 650 people are questioned again and can be ruled out as possible perpetrators. Although there were around 70 passengers on board the train, only one person is able to provide the police with helpful information. On March 23, 1988, 18-year-old Hélène Jusseline is among those on board the train. She works as an au pair in England and comes from France. During her interrogation, she states that she heard loud screams shortly after departure in Brixton. Brixton is the last stop before the terminus at London Victoria. Hélène was sitting in the car behind Debbie's. She says the screams lasted about 2 minutes. The journey time between Brixton and London Victoria stations is about 6 minutes. Assuming that the screams Hélène heard did indeed come from Debbie, those 6 minutes would be the time window for the murder. This suggests an experienced perpetrator. Otherwise, the short time frame and the extreme brutality would be difficult to explain. And the perpetrator must have gotten off at the London Victoria terminus. Hélène also has an observation about this. She says that after reaching the destination station, she noticed a red-haired man. She's not sure which compartment he came from, but it may have been the same one from which the screams came. Hélène followed the man for a while, but she lost sight of him in the crowded station concourse. The man was around 40 years old and rather muscular. He had a mustache and was wearing gray pants. Other witnesses also reported seeing a male person at the station. One passenger reported seeing a small, stocky man jump off the train at the Victoria terminus. Another man was seen at Pench East Station, the 6th stop on Debbie's journey. He is said to have left one compartment of the train and re-entered another carriage. This could have been the carriage in which Debbie was sitting. Another passenger also observed a stocky, unkempt man with dirty blonde hair getting off the train at Pench East. He was wearing a pale brown jacket and was around 30 years old. A woman says that a man on the train had been staring at her in an unpleasant way at the departure station. Another person claims to have seen a man with bloody cuts on his face on the second track of the station about 10 minutes after the train arrived in London. This would fit with the perpetrator being injured in the fight with Debbie. Another witness observed a man cleaning a bloody cut on his face in the station's restroom facilities in the afternoon. It is unclear whether all the descriptions refer to the same person, but this possibility cannot be ruled out. Either way, the police would naturally like to locate all these men and question them as witnesses. The police also produce a composite sketch based on the description that most likely matches the perpetrator. Unfortunately, however, this measure does not lead to any new witnesses or even the perpetrator being identified. On March 23, 1988, an international soccer match between England and the Netherlands was played at Wembley Stadium in London. It is therefore possible that witnesses, people who were seen, or even the perpetrator are not from the UK. Accordingly, the men may not even have been aware that they were being sought. At the same time, it is also possible that the two men with facial injuries seen by witnesses were injured in a scuffle between soccer fans. According to the police, there were several riots and fights between England and Netherlands fans that day. If that were true, they would be ruled out as perpetrators. Although the Debbie Lindsley murder case is being investigated feverishly, the police are unable to locate a suspect. About 6 months after her daughter's murder, Margaret Linsley is overcome by the sad suspicion that Debbie's killer may never be caught. and unfortunately, Margaret's suspicion proves to be correct. In November 1988, there is a hearing in the Debbie Lindsley murder case. Helene Jusseline, the French au pair, has to answer for not calling for help. After all, she heard screams shortly after leaving Brixton. Helene says she was in shock and felt as if she were glued to her seat. She fell into a kind of paralysis. That is why she only reported to the police after she learned of the murder. During this hearing, a forensic pathologist also mentions that other passengers had also heard commotion. Nevertheless, no one intervened or informed the train staff. Unfortunately, the Debbie Lindsley case is becoming a cold case. To this day, no one knows who murdered the young woman on the train to London. But Debbie's killer left something behind at the scene of the crime that gives cause for hope: his own blood trail. Fortunately, these were professionally collected and stored at the time. When Debbie was murdered in the late 1980s, DNA technology was not yet very advanced. But that has changed. And in 2002, experts succeeded in completely reconstructing the perpetrator's DNA profile. To mark the occasion, the case was once again widely reported in the media. A large poster campaign was launched at London Victoria Station to commemorate the murder of Debbie Lindsley. The aim was to put pressure on the perpetrator if he was still frequenting the station. Although the police still believe that Debbie's killer is not a first-time offender, there is no match in the DNA database. However, the database was not created until 1997. That is 9 years after Debbie's murder. Even if the perpetrator had been recorded in the DNA database before, the police would still not be able to find him. The technology is simply too new for that. Investigators also do not rule out the possibility that the perpetrator is already deceased and that they are investigating an unknown dead person. Debbie's mother, Margaret, says, "From the beginning, we thought it was a stranger. But the police followed a certain pattern that started with family and friends. I wanted them to take blood samples from all the men in Orpington, but they said it would be too expensive." Debbie's mother also reports that she did not have a good relationship with the investigators. Although they were very diligent in their investigation and undoubtedly put their heart and soul into the case, there were also some unpleasant encounters. For example, the police advised Margaret and Debbie's father, Arthur, not to approach the matter too emotionally. This is a remark that Debbie's mother understandably still resents years later. Debbie's parents also disagree with the investigators' approach. The Lindsleys believe it is impossible that Debbie was murdered by someone she knew personally. Debbie was very much in need of harmony and never had arguments or conflicts with other people. Shortly after the murder, Debbie's parents tried to persuade the police to conduct a large-scale search. Instead, the officers reconstructed Debbie's entire social life. To a certain extent, this is of course urgently necessary and a sensible routine in a murder case. The police even contacted old friends from her school days, even though Debbie Lindsley was already 26 years old at the time of her murder. And after all that work, they find no evidence that anyone from her circle of acquaintances could have murdered her. Even her boyfriend, who lived in Scotland, can be ruled out as a suspect. The police have to admit that it is very likely that the perpetrator was a complete stranger and Debbie a random victim. To this day, the murderer remains undiscovered. But even if the perpetrator has since died, the case could still be solved. DNA matching would make it easy for investigators to find a connection between the crime scene and a suspect. But to do that, you would first need a suspect. It is quite possible that there were others who knew about the crime. Investigators believe that the brutality of the crime may have also shaken the perpetrator. It is possible that he may have behaved strangely toward friends or relatives after the crime, or even confided in them. In addition, the perpetrator's clothing must have been heavily contaminated with Debbie's and his own blood. Debbie's parents, Margaret and Arthur, spent years learning about police investigation procedures. They wanted to understand how the police system works and how they might be able to help their murdered daughter. They worked tirelessly to ensure that the perpetrator would eventually be caught. Debbie's parents even corresponded with a convicted double murderer. They hope this will give them a deeper insight into the mind of a murderer and somehow provide them with new leads. Neither of them can ever fully come to terms with Debbie's murder. Sadly, Debbie's mother Margaret dies in 2013. She will never know who took her daughter's life 25 years earlier. In the same year, the British police once again offered a reward of £25,000. Unfortunately, even this incentive did not lead to the perpetrator being caught. Debbie Lindsley's family is still searching for answers today. The railway employee who found Debbie's body on the train at the time was so traumatized that he had to give up his job. And Helene, the French au pair, probably still blames herself for not raising the alarm sooner. Although there has been repeated speculation, mainly from amateur detectives, about serial killers who could possibly be responsible for Debbie's violent death, there has been no real evidence, circumstantial evidence, or even investigations against anyone. The murderer who killed Deborah Lindsley in broad daylight on a train to London in 1988 remains a phantom to this day. The murder of Debbie Lindsley is as astonishing as it is shocking. A young woman is brutally murdered in broad daylight on a busy train in central London. Her killer manages to escape unidentified. Even today, the actual motive remains a mystery. Although Debbie was most likely a random victim, the perpetrator had probably planned to commit murder. Otherwise, he would hardly have carried such a large knife with him. Furthermore, he accepted the risk of committing his crime in broad daylight. And in doing so, he took a big risk. So was the perpetrator, as the police suspected, an experienced killer for whom murder was nothing unusual? Or the exact opposite? A perpetrator who may have committed his first murder and was unaware of the danger of being caught and leaving traces behind? If you like, feel free to write your thoughts in the comments. Maybe we'll get the answers to these questions someday. After all, the perpetrator left his DNA on the train. If the perpetrator is still alive and is eventually arrested for another crime, he could be convicted based on his DNA profile. I would really hope for that for Debbie's loved ones. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, comment, and/or subscribe. Feel free to activate the bell. It really helps me a lot. This way, the video gets a lot of interaction shortly after it is uploaded, which increases the likelihood that the video will be suggested to people who have not yet subscribed to Insolito. Thank you in advance, and thank you for watching. I wish you a good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on when you watch the video, and hope to see you again in the next video. Until then, bye everyone.